John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Today we are reading Hellblazer number 80, and just a little catch up on what's been going on in the last couple issues. George, the brother of John's old friend Dez, is in a lot of trouble because he killed a police officer that tried to arrest him and also killed his mother. So he is on the run, and in the midst of all that, of course, tensions in the area are growing between the community that is mostly black and the police. And currently, George is hiding out in the garage of a couple of his friends, and they're all talking about potentially rioting and trying to stop the police from going into their neighborhood under the guise of looking for George. And while that's going on, in the background, we're seeing the first of the fallen rise to power because he realized that he is not just a simple demon, he is something else much more powerful. So he actually takes out the other two members of the triumvirate that he was a part of, and they kind of ruled hell in a balancing act with each other. But now that he realizes he is much more than them, he kills them without much effort. And he also realizes that if he's not a demon, then he's not subject to their rules. So the rules that John caught him up in, where if John is killed, then the triumvirate must fight for power and God will come down and win over them, it doesn't really apply. So he's not worried about God. He's not worried about the triumvirate anymore. He is just solely focused on getting revenge on John. And as part of that, he has teamed up with Astra, who became a demoness while she was in hell. And Astra was the little girl that John accidentally got killed when he was really playing above his league with magic and called forth the demon Nergal, who ended up taking Astra's soul to hell with him. So she has approached the first of the fallen to get payback on John as well. So there's basically a team up of two people that really hate John. And then lastly, in the midst of trying to figure out what the first of the fallen is going to do to him and what he's going to do to get out of it, John is also trying to save a old girlfriend of his named Helen, who somehow became addicted to heroin and ended up becoming a prostitute in order to support that habit. So he saw her on the street and he couldn't believe what he was seeing, so he pulled her into his car and took her away to his place where she is now detoxing and really going through it. But luckily, she does have some support because John's current girlfriend's sister is a nurse and she knows a doctor, so they're helping John out, but mostly reluctantly because they don't like what John's doing, but they don't want anything bad to happen to Helen. And the reason they don't just take her to a hospital is because Helen's pimp was on the street when John took her. There was a little bit of a scuffle between Chaz and the pimp, and he got the shit beat out of him by Chaz. So now he's extra mad because he wants his revenge on Constantine as well as getting Helen back. And that is where we left off on the last issue, with her pimp Philip finding out that she was in John's house and finding out where that was, and her waking up to him standing over her bed. So first things first, with issue 80, we got the cover. We see a woman who looks like she's dead or just beat very, very badly, and she's covered with blood, and she has some white sheets on top of her that John is pulling back so that he can see exactly the damage that's been done to her, and he looks pretty upset and shocked. We also see that this issue is written by Garth Ennis with art by Steve Dillon, and as we turn to the first page, we see the name of this issue is Rake at the Gates of Hell, Part 3. And we start off in the church of Rick the Vicar, who is one of John's old friends. And it is a Sunday morning, and he is giving his sermon, and he's reading the Bible to his congregation, and he's saying, "And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which was the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books, according to their works. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and hell delivered up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every man according to their works. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. And whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Then we get a shot of his congregation, and they look kind of scared and also very into his sermon. And he kind of pauses as he looks at them and says, "Here endeth the lesson." And as he says this, he looks down in front of the Bible on his pulpit, and hidden from the view of his congregation, because it's behind the Bible, we can see a little mirror with lines of cocaine, a razor blade, and a rolled up dollar bill. So it seems that Rick has fallen off the path, and he's having a grand old time. And it seems like the fire and brimstone speech was actually all kind of a joke that he doesn't really believe in anymore, because he smiles as he looks down at the cocaine, and he says under his breath so that the congregation can't hear, "And if you believe a word of it, you'll believe anything." Then we see off to the side of the stage, behind a wall so that the congregation once again can't see it, there is a woman standing in lingerie, and we saw her before. She was actually sleeping in his bed the night that John called him to tell him about Hedder's death. So it seems it's not just Hedder's death that has thrown him over the edge. He was already kind of off the path because he was sleeping with this woman, and now he's doing cocaine. And as she hides just out of sight from the congregation, she smiles at Rick and laughs flirtatiously. Then we cut to the end of the service, and people are leaving, and two women are talking, and one of them says, "He's very good, that Reverend Nelson. Ever so zealous." And the other woman she's talking to replies, "Zealous, yes. You don't get enough of that these days." Then as we turn the page, we cut to John Constantine, and he seems to be waiting inside of an abandoned house, and as he does, he smokes a cigarette, and his narration says, "So here I am again in the right place at the right time. Tell you what, I'm sodden tired. Been nosing around all night, next to no sleep, but I got what I needed, and I'm all ready for the mysterious entrance bit, or I would be if it didn't feel so wrong. I haven't got a single reason for doing this. It's none of my business, and I wouldn't even be here if I didn't have this stupid bloody tendency to think that I can fix the world." And as John thinks this, we see George come into the house with a crowbar, and he immediately goes over to the stairs, and he begins to pry up one of the steps. And when he looks underneath the step, he says, "Shit." So it seems John was waiting for George because he somehow knew George was going to come here, and now he's going to try to get involved with whatever's going on with George and the police. So as John watches George pull up the wrong stair tread, his narration says, "Go on then, Constantine. Play your part. Say your lines. Follow it through no matter how tired and worn it feels, or how much your gut tells you you've got too much to deal with as it is. So for Christ's sake, don't push it." And then from behind George, John says, "Wrong step, George." Then John walks out from the darkened doorway, lighting a cigarette as he reveals himself to George, and his narration says, "That's it. Play it cool. Light up your little trademark. It saves you from looking in his eyes." And as George sees him, he says, "What the hell do you want?" And John replies, "Wrong step. Bates told you the fifth one up, remember?" And confused, George asks, "How?" And John cuts him off, answering, "You and Tosser Bates were in Borstal together. Bates tends to mouth off a bit when someone gets him pissed. 2 + 2 = he got you the shooter and told you where to find Hollis's spare ammo. What do you think your brother would make of all this?" So it seems George has come to this house to find some more ammunition for his shotgun, knowing that since he's on the run, he might need it. Then George begins to pry up the fifth step, and he says, "Lots of people are asking what Des would have thought of me all of a sudden. None of them knew him like I did, but they all turned out to be experts on him anyway. Funny that." And then he reaches into the cavity underneath the stair tread, and he pulls out a bag of many, many shotgun shells. And John says, "Oh, well, that's all right then. Go ahead and start your bloodbath." And then very angrily, George snaps, "Seem to remember once telling you not to judge me, Constantine." And then he turns around to look at John in the eyes and says, "Sod it. Why don't you just piss off? It's nothing to do with you. It's about my people and the filth and a bunch of bastard Nazis who want to turf us out of our homes." And not blinking, John says very sarcastically, "Yeah, I've been having a deco at your people. Scared kids and crack dealers. Well hard." And this just pisses George off, so he turns to John and he says, "Screw you! What do you frickin' know about it? So you, it's just the blacks on the warpath again." And John tries to cut George off, saying, "Piss off." But George fires back, "No, you piss off. You're just like everybody else. Oh, there's Sambo. I'll twist him round me little finger. And then he gets really close to John, looking him right in the eyes and says, well, I've had enough of it, all right. We've been twisted to bleeding buggery around here. And from now on, any twister's getting friggin' well beat to shit. And John yells back at him, still staring him right in the eyes, and says, yeah, that's it. Start a sodden war. And then if you win, that bastard of a dealer can be in charge, because he's used to screwing people up. And if you lose, you're screwed anyway. And then George turns away from him and puts his head in his hand and says, you'll never understand what it's like. You couldn't, because you'll always have a choice. What in Christ's name do you want with me anyway? And John pauses for a second and he says, now that you ask, George, I haven't got a bleeding clue. I suppose I wanted to help out an old mate's brother. But with all this backs to the wall, let's join a gang shit in the air, there's no room for something as little as that, is there? And then we just get a panel of John walking out of the house, so it seems he can't really do anything to help George out. And as he walks away down the street, we see his narration say, doesn't work if they're not afraid of you, Constantine, because then you can't control them. And then you're just another arsehole standing screaming at the tide. Then we turn the page, and we cut to a new scene. It looks like there is a bar in the middle of some kind of void. It's basically just a blue building with black all around it, so it seems like this might be just another dimensional plane. And this bar is called the Helter Skelter, and we see the first of the fallen is walking towards the doors. And as he walks in, we see this is a pretty lively bar. We can hear bits of everybody's conversations as the first of the fallen walks in. But all that stops the second everybody sees him, and almost as if there was a record scratch, everybody automatically turns and looks at him and is silent. So the first of the fallen walks to the bartender and says, I heard there was someone here who wanted to meet me. And the bartender is terrified and he says, well, but before he can answer, he's cut off by someone saying, that'd be me. Then we see a very tall white man approach who's got long hair and a nicely kept but long beard. And he's in a very fancy white suit with roses that are embroidered on the lapels. And as the first of the fallen sees him, he says, what do you want, Arcadian? And we've actually seen this man before, specifically on the Christmas issue. This is, in fact, the Lord of the Dance, but he's no longer in his Norse armor and stuff, and apparently he is the owner of this bar in the middle of this weird dimension. So to the question of what he wants, the Lord of the Dance answers, a word with the devil. And a very annoyed First of the Fallen replies, concerning. And the Lord of the Dance answers, John Constantine. And the First of the Fallen asks, what's your interest in him? And the Lord of the Dance answers, he's a friend of mine. He helped me through a bad patch a couple of Christmases ago, and I owe him for it. So my interest is in you leaving him alone. And at this, the First of the Fallen gets very angry and he says, what? Do you seriously think that even for 1 minute I would? But he's cut off by the Lord of the Dance answering, no, I don't suppose you would. Ah, well. And then he immediately headbutts the First of the Fallen in the face. And as the First of the Fallen reels back in pain, the Lord of the Dance says, you've had your chance, bastard. But before he can continue, the First of the Fallen yells, son of a bitch! And then he reaches out and he digs his fingers into the rib cage of the Lord of the Dance, and he grabs hold, and before the Lord of the Dance can do anything, the First of the Fallen rips the front of his rib cage out. And it seems like the Lord of the Dance was not expecting this, and he falls down to the ground, clutching his chest, and the First of the Fallen hunches down and gets right in the Lord of the Dance's face, and he says, I'm not going to kill you, moron, because I like a good party myself, and I don't want to have to destroy the Spirit Lord of Celebration at the time of my greatest triumph. But I'm telling you now, you ever screw with me again, you even dream of it, and the party's bloody well over. Then we turn the page and we cut to John, who's making a call from a payphone, and he's impatiently waiting as it rings, and then someone answers and he says, Chaz, what are you doing at my gaff? So it seems John has called his house in order to try to talk to Lucy or Sarah and try to check up on Helen. But when we cut to Chaz and see his side of the conversation, we see the mattress is now empty, but it's covered with blood, and the window next to the bed is broken. And Chaz answers John's question about why he's there, saying, bleeding waiting for you to call, that's what. Where the friggin' hell have you been? And before John can answer, Chaz just continues saying, sod that, just listen. That bastard, what's his name, came back, Helen's pimp. He beat the living shit out of her, and God knows what else he would have done if I hadn't turned up. And then John says something, but we can't hear it. And Chaz replies, no, he liked it. No, Joe and them took her to the hospital. I don't know, do I? I'm not a bleeding doctor. Look, where are you? Yeah? Right. I'm on my way. 20 minutes. And then as John is hanging up the phone, we see a bunch of people impatiently waiting outside the phone booth. And John is just looking incredibly sad because he did not want this to happen to Helen. It just seems like everything that he's planning is going to shit. Then we turn the page and we cut back to Rick and the woman he's been seeing. And it's still the same day because she's still wearing the same lingerie. And now she's laying on a pew eating macaroons or cookies that have been dipped in some sort of cream. And as he sits on the floor next to her drinking tea, she's scratching his head and she's saying, this is nice. And then she looks at her cookie, or biscuit as they call it in England, and looks at the cream on top of it and she says, what is it, Ricky? The white stuff. And Rick answers, it's cream, Betsy. Special cream for our special cream tea. And Betsy replies, it's making me go all squishy. So it seems possibly this cream has a drug or something in it because she seems super high and he's just chilling, so he's probably high too. So as she's going to take a bite from one of the cookies, some cream drips onto her chin and she smiles and says, that was ever so much fun this morning. And I got to say, it seems like maybe she's talking about more than just the sermon, because not only is there white cream dripped along her chin, but the way she's saying it, it just really seems sexual. And Rick replies, everyone has to have a hobby. And she says, and yours just happens to be sacrilege. And Rick kind of smiles and then drinks a sip of tea and he says, well, yes, but I like my sacrilege to be appropriate. And St. John the Divine was obviously on some stunning good shit to have revelations like the ones he had. And Betsy replies, it's nice to see you smiling again. And I'm sure she's saying this because he's probably been in a pretty sad place ever since his best mate Heather got killed. So he kind of looks off into the distance painfully and smiles and says, I'm sorry to have been such poor company, my love. It was a shock when Heather died. Oh, that splendid oaf. That madman's grin that told you he was sane while the world was mad. The crackle born in the cauldron of a beer gut. If it is indeed the Lord who picks our friends for us, then I owe the Almighty a debt beyond imagining. And just as he says that, all of a sudden, the door to the church bursts open. And we see the first of the fallen enter, and he's wearing like a nice blue suit, I'm assuming just because he's going to church. And as the two of them stand up, Rick looks at the first, and he knows who he is, and he says, run, Betsy, never look back. But she's confused, and she questions, Ricky? But he yells again, run! So she takes off, and as the first of the fallen approaches Rick, he runs up to his pulpit, and it looks like he's going to hide and pray because he starts the Lord's Prayer saying, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. But in one of the funniest damn panels I've ever seen, it turns out that Rick has a machine gun hidden in the back of his pulpit, I guess to go with the cocaine that was there before. So as he grabs it, he jumps out to the side like it's an action movie, and he begins firing at the first of the fallen, and he's still saying the Lord's Prayer, saying, he maketh me lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. But he becomes a little bit scared as the first of the fallen doesn't seem to be bothered at all by the bullets. And he, in fact, just keeps walking forward towards Rick. And Rick is still saying the Lord's Prayer in desperation, saying, yea, I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. And then he realizes that everything is futile. There's no point to this. So he puts the gun up to his chin and he says, old friend. And he pulls the trigger and he shoots himself in the head, committing suicide. And the first of the fallen looks kind of disgusted at this. I'm assuming he came here to get information out of Rick, and now he can't. Then we cut to the hospital where Helen is being held, and John and Chaz are walking through the hallways towards her room. And Chaz is recounting to John what exactly happened, and he's saying, so I walk in the door, and the bastard's right on top of her, punching her stupid. Lucy's tied to the chair. Helen doesn't even know what planet she's on. I go right for him, but Christ, he's fast. Off the bed and clean through the bleeding window like. And John asks Chaz, how the hell did he find her? And Chaz replies, don't know. Look, John. And then they both pause in front of her door, and Chaz continues, she's a real mess, okay? I don't know exactly what he did, but... And then there's a pregnant pause, kind of insinuating that more was done to her than just a beating. And Chaz continues, Joe's wrangled this room here, but it's on the QT, know what I mean? We're not supposed to even be here. And as John walks past Chaz towards the door, he says, wait for us in the motor, will you? And then he slightly cracks the door of Helen's room and he peeks inside. And we see Sarah, Lucy, and Joe are in the room standing around Helen's bed. And Helen's face is completely bandaged. There is a bandage over one of her eyes and it looks like there's blood coming out of it. So that seems pretty serious. And her left arm is also bandaged. And Joe, Sarah, and Lucy all look at John and they all look very angry. And then John looks at Helen and he can see that her bandaged eye is open, so she's awake at least. But Joe, Sarah, and Lucy all give him a look that says, "You better not come in here." So John reads the room and he turns around and silently closes the door. He walks away from the room. John fumbles a bunch of cigarettes and they all fall to the ground. And then he picks one up and lights one. And as he does that, we see Sarah come out from the room and she says to him, "Happy now?" And a very sad John replies, "What?" And Sarah answers, "Happy you've got us all mixed up in this? Joe's had to fix the room up for her without permission. She and Lucy could lose their jobs. And on top of that, Lucy spent 10 minutes tied to a chair watching that bastard do those things and telling her she was next. Jesus, he was going to kill my bloody sister. Is this what happens around you? Does this shit just pile up higher and higher? How do you do it?" And John doesn't really answer her here. He just asks her a question. "What about Helen?" And Sarah replies, "Her nose is broken, so's her collarbone. And the specialist hasn't been yet, but Joe reckons she's going to lose her left eye." And John says, "I don't know, when I was in there, I just had to get out. I felt so bloody useless." And Sarah's kind of angry at this and she says, "Oh, Christ." And then John asks her, "Did he rape her?" And this upsets Sarah even more and she says, "Why? Isn't it bad enough for you yet?" And John is confused by this and he says, "You what?" And she answers, You are really something. Do you know that? You want it that way, so it's really bad. So you can get bloody angry enough to go down there and commit whatever atrocity you've got in mind for that guy. It won't help Helen one bit, but you don't care because you know you're no good at helping her anyway. Because all you've got left is your freaking revenge. Well, I've got news for you, chum. The reason you felt useless in there is because you are. You are like every stupid macho bastard I've known. You can't think with anything except your dick or your fists. You think you know it all. You think you're trying to help, and all you're doing is making things worse." And John literally can't take this yelling from her, so he turns away from her and he begins to run away down the hall. He even drops his cigarette. And as we turn the page, we see him in the car with Chaz outside of the hospital, and Chaz is saying, "Take it easy." And a very upset John says, "Can you still get someone done over?" And Chaz is kind of shocked by this question, and he says, You mean for money?" And John lights up another cigarette and says, "Yeah, I mean for money. Legs broken, face smashed in, all that." And Chaz replies, "Well, yeah." And John says, "Good. Lenny Fisher will know where to find the little turd." Now, if you remember in the last issue, Lenny Fisher was the man that Philip the pimp tortured in order to find out where John lives. So either Lenny's dead or maybe he's even in the same hospital as Helen, because Philip cut off one of his fingers and he cut part of his lip too. But John doesn't know that yet, so he continues saying, "Get some pair of savages and pay him whatever they ask to stamp on him, right? Tell him to make sure he gets out of town and never comes back. And tell him, when they're doing it, to do it hard." And Chaz looks at John and replies, "Well, if that's what you want." And John confirms, "Yeah, money's no problem." And then I guess because Chaz hasn't really seen John like this, he's kind of shocked by John's cold response, and he says, "Bloody hell." But John doesn't really take notice of that at all. He just gets out of Chaz's car and says, "I'll call you." Then we turn the page and we cut to Rick the Vic, and he is once again in some sort of church. But as you might have remembered, he just killed himself. So he's appeared in some sort of church in the afterlife, I guess. It basically looks like a big stone room, as if the church was inside of a cave that someone carved windows in or something. And Rick looks confused because he looks down in his pulpit and he looks over at the pews, and then we see behind him there is an upside down cross. And then off panel someone says, "Surprised? Suicide is a sin, remember?" And then Rick looks out into the pews and he sees the first of the fallen sitting in one of them. And the first of the fallen continues, "So your ass is mine, as they say." And Rick just stares on with shock as the first continues saying, "Preach to me, preacher man. Where does Constantine keep the Archangel's heart?" So it seems Rick's fight earlier was in vain because he made the bad call to kill himself, which put him in hell instead of in heaven. And of course, the first of the fallen can find him in hell. So a very nervous Rick answers him saying, I don't know. And the first looks kind of disappointed and he says, No, you don't. But you know who does, am I right? And I guess because Rick is surprised that he's in hell and maybe the despair of that is hitting him, he just answers right away saying, there's a boy, a psychic, John said. He used him to find the angel. And the first of the fallen stands up, kind of happy, and he says, so he'd know where to look, wouldn't he? What's his name? And once again, Rick doesn't really hide anything. He just nervously answers, Nigel. And the first of the fallen smiles very big, and then he says, come on, in for a penny, in for a pound. Where do I find him? And we don't hear Rick's answer, but we know he does, because we see a look of anguish on his face, and he begins to cry, like he's terrified and he's just been broken. Then we turn the page, and we cut to George's neighborhood. And we can see George's friend Will, from last issue, is standing in front of a police officer, and he's saying, nothing's changed. You're not coming into this estate. That's it. And the policeman says, I don't think you really understand your situation here, sunshine. And Will looks around and says, no, I think I understand it perfectly, pal. Then we get a zoomed out panel where we can see it's not just them talking in the middle of the street. There's actually behind Will a whole group of people from the neighborhood, and they are armed with sticks. And then behind the police officer, there's a bunch of riot police in riot gear. So the officer, who's not very happy, says, you're lucky I'm even giving you the chance to talk. And Will says in a mocking slave voice, Lordy bless you, massa. And the cop is not happy about that impression, and he says, look, George Ridley is wanted for murder. We're here to support the investigating officers, and if you continue to deny them access to the area, then we will have to get you out of the way. It's the law. And Will just looks him straight in the face and says, your people tried to arrest George on a bullshit charge and killed his mom into the bargain. If you'd keep them fascist pricks away from us in the first place, we wouldn't be in this mess. So piss on your law. And then he gives the officer the middle finger. And then both men walk away from each other without saying a word. And we can see in the crowd of people that George is there along with the friend named Spaz, or Zap as he calls himself. And George is saying, I don't want this. This is so freaking bad. I ought to give in. And Zap says to him, bit bleeding late for that, Georgie. And George replies, it's gonna be a sodden massacre. Then we cut to a panel of the officer that Will was talking to saying to the other riot police, screw this. And then he points to an officer and says, you, take that bastard out now. Rest of you, get ready to charge. Then we see the officer he was pointing to pull his firearm out, and it doesn't look like a firearm that fires normal bullets. And that's confirmed as the officer says, plastic bullets, sir? We're firing first? And the officer who gave the order says, for God's sake, Sergeant, do you really think it's going to matter who bloody well fires first? So the sergeant doesn't say anything. He just takes aim at the back of Will, who's just walking into the crowd of people, and he fires. And the bullet that looks kind of like the size of a roll of quarters hits Will right on the back of the neck, and there's a crack sound, and then Will falls to the ground, and there's blood coming out of his mouth, and he doesn't move. And this happens right in front of George and Zap. And George sees this and says, Will! And Zap yells out, freaking get him! Freaking get him! Then we turn the page, and we cut to the bank of the Thames River, and we don't see any people. We just see a silhouette of the London Bridge, but we hear someone say, now the other one. Then we get a panel of the first of the fallen looking very happy as he looks down on someone, and he continues saying, that's the way, nice and clean. I want to be able to see my face in them. Then we get an even more zoomed out panel where we can see his full body and who he's talking to. And we can see he's in his suit again. He's leaning against the concrete wall that goes along the bank of the Thames. And we see he's got one foot on the back of Gabriel the angel as Gabriel licks the other foot clean. And we can also see in the first of the fallen's hand that he has Gabriel's heart now. So it seems we've just skipped over the fact that he went to Nigel's, to him already having the heart, so who knows what happened to Nigel. And the first of the fallen is smiling and he says, attaboy. One thing I have to say for Constantine, he knew how to treat a snotty little queer like you, didn't he? And he doesn't say the word queer there, he says another very derogatory word for gay people. Then the first of the fallen takes his foot that was on Gabriel's back and he pushes Gabriel's head into the sand and he yells, "Didn't he?" And then Gabriel tries to sit up as he gasps and he says, "Please, don't crush my heart. Please don't. I'll do anything. I'll find Constantine for you, I swear. But please, I'm begging you. I swear, whatever you want, anything. I love you, Lord Satan. I love you. I love you. I'll always serve you. Shit on me. Piss on me. Whatever you want to do. But don't do it. Don't make me go to hell." And then he latches onto the first of the fallen's leg as he continues to beg, saying, "I know what my father did to you. He was wrong. Sick. Oh, Lord Satan, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please." And then there's a very gushy sound, and we see blood dripping down in front of Gabriel's eyes, which are very intensely open as they look at the blood. And we hear the first of the fallen say, "I'm touched." Then we get a panel of him looking down at Gabriel with zero emotion in his face, and we see where the blood was coming from. The first of the fallen has squished Gabriel's heart in his hand. Then we turn the page and we see John standing in his bedroom, and he's looking at the open, empty box that once held Gabriel's heart, and he just says, "Shit." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue, and it seems like every friend that John had except Chaz is either dead or has been put in very precarious situations. And everything John hoped would help him defeat the first of the fallen have failed completely. So we'll have to see what John does in order to get out of this one in the next couple issues, of which there are only 3 left. So I'm excited to see where this goes and see how Garth Ennis can wrap up his run of Hellblazer. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains.and-comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com, and we will see you on the next one.